Hello, my dear follower. How are you today? Good? Fantastic. What's my name? Profe Kyle, exactly. And if you're a Spanish speaker learning English and you want information about my group classes or my self-learning courses in order to reach fluency in American English, then visit profekyle.com. And this is a simple English video. Why simple English? Because you're not going to go from beginner to advanced in one day. It's a process. And of course, probably right now, you're not going to be able to understand a real English video because you haven't reached that level of English. You need to have a simpler English to keep on training your brain to understand the English language. So for that reason, simple English. For me, it's pretty obvious. If you have questions about this, leave your questions below in the comments. And in today's simple English video, turn on the subtitles here if you want a little bit of extra help. I'm going to be talking about my first trip to Mexico. Actually, my first two trips. Because for me, my first two trips, each one was a first trip to Mexico. Because my first trip to Mexico was with my ex-girlfriend and I didn't speak Spanish. So in a way, it was my first trip, but I was a real tourist at that time. And my second trip, I was by myself and I was using Spanish in order to survive, in order to live in Mexico. So I want to talk about both trips in this video. And of course, I have a lot of followers from Mexico. They might be interested to know about my Mexican experiences. So let's talk about my very first trip to Mexico. It was to Mexico City. This was, I think 2020. And I was either 19 or 20 years old. At that time, I was dating a Mexican girl from Mexico City. So for Mexicans, those people are called Chilangos. So she was a Chilanga from Mexico City. And yeah, she invited me to go with her to Mexico City to visit her family and to see where she grew up. And yeah, I dated her for 3 years. It was a very serious relationship. So obviously it's normal for two people in a serious relationship to visit each other's hometowns and get to know the families. So this is my first time to see where she grew up and also to understand her culture a little bit better. Now at that time, I didn't speak Spanish. I was taking Spanish courses at university, but I didn't really speak Spanish at that time, even though this trip was a good time to get used to Spanish a bit more. But even during the trip, I only used Spanish a few times. So I think it might have been spring break from university, because we were both in university at that time. If you want to know more about my university experience, I believe I have a video here which talks about it in simple English. And spring break for Canadian universities is in, I can't remember, I think it might be February. So obviously it's still kind of winter, but I think we have spring break a little bit earlier than our American compatriots. So I think it was during spring break, she and her family invited me to go to Mexico City with her. So yeah, we did. I stayed at her family's house. Her family they have money. So they lived in one of those, in Spanish they're called conjunto residencial. For me it's kind of like a castle. Not like a castle, but you know, they have a big wall to protect them from the riffraff, from the poorer neighborhoods. They have a private security guard which lets in the vehicles and lets out the vehicles. They have a maid that cleans the house every day or once a week. I think it was every day in their case. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience for me because I'm Canadian, and if you don't know, Canadians, we normally don't hire people to take care of our children or to clean our houses or to cook. But in Latin America, it's quite common for any family with a little bit of money to basically outsource responsibilities to people from poorer neighborhoods. So people to cook, people to clean, people to protect them, sometimes even drivers, and of course private schools so their kids get the best education. In my case, I never had a a private cleaner, never had a private cook, never had a private driver. I went to a public school. So obviously going to Latin America and seeing this upper middle class Mexican family live was a little bit of a culture shock, because obviously they did things in a very different way than my family did things. And for me too, it was very interesting because I stayed for 1 week in Mexico City. We went to a few other places, but I think most of the time we were in Mexico City. And yeah, we would go for supper every day to these very exclusive restaurants, like exclusive steakhouse, exclusive Chinese food. All these restaurants had professional valets that would park your vehicle for you. And the family, they went to these restaurants every month, so they knew all the waiters, the managers, so they were talking to them. Hello, how are you doing? Nice to see you. Do you want the usual? That type of thing. Obviously, I'm Canadian, so again, I'm not used to that. My family, we never really went to fancy restaurants. In my youth, maybe we went to a fancy restaurant 3 times, and maybe we went to a normal restaurant once per month if we went to a city. It just wasn't something common for us to do. So it was a very, very interesting experience. I wouldn't say it was good, I wouldn't say it was bad, it was just a different way of living life. And of course, I grew up in the countryside, they grew up, well, my ex-girlfriend, she grew up in one of the world's biggest cities. So just completely different backgrounds. I grew up with horses, dogs, cats, and lots of trees, lots of land. She grew up surrounded by lots of people, lots of houses, and a huge variety of places to eat. And if you don't know, I love Mexican food. Taco Tuesday! So this first trip to Mexico was a good way to really try authentic Mexican food. And of course, her family, a true Mexican family, they loved Mexican food too. So I went to these different places, both exclusive restaurants with fancy food and also to regular restaurants with regular Mexican food. So I was eating enchiladas, I was eating tacos. We also took a road trip to Guanajuato and San Miguel de Allende. And it was interesting to make pit stops at regular restaurants to have just very cheap, basic Mexican food, and it was still delicious for me. And I was also introduced to cajeta. So if you don't know what cajeta is, I don't know how to describe it. I think it's like burnt sugar, more or less. They kind of have it everywhere in Latin America, but most Latinos will say that it's different ways of preparing in each country. So I had cajeta for the first time. We stopped off at this random store on the side of the road on our way back to Mexico City from Guanajuato, and I bought some cajeta for my family. And yeah, cajeta is delicious. If you're ever in Mexico, eat as much as you can. The food is delicious. I don't love spicy food. People think because I like Mexican food, that means I like spicy. And yeah, Mexicans have spicy food, but most of the time there are options of Mexican food which aren't spicy. So yeah, don't be too worried about eating things that are too spicy. Just ask the waiter or your friends if the food that you're interested in is spicy or not. And yeah, they'll usually tell you, oh, this sauce is spicier than this sauce. So if you don't want spicy, it's better to have these enchiladas with this sauce than these enchiladas with that sauce. Just a tip for you. So it was a fantastic trip. I also remember I said my first sentence in Spanish during this trip, my first spontaneous sentence in Spanish. We were getting ready to leave the house, and of course the girls, so my ex-girlfriend and her sister, were taking a bit of time to get ready. You know, women take a while to get ready sometimes. So I went into the parents' room. They were also putting on their jackets. And I told them in Spanish something like, I put on my jacket because it's a little bit cold. It was more or less my first sentence in Spanish. So the mother, she was the typical Latina mother. So she was very excited that I had said this sentence in Spanish, so she was clapping, yay, 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 woo. She was very proud of me that I had said this sentence. And yeah, for me too, I was very proud that I had said a sentence in Spanish without being in a classroom in a very natural way. And then on top of saying my first sentence in Spanish, I also got to really get to know Mexican culture. I saw many of the famous landmarks in Mexico City. I can't remember all the names off the top of my head, but the family did a really good job of making me feel at home in Mexico City and showing me the best sides of Mexico City, whether it was the food or the landmarks. And then, of course, we went to San Miguel de Allende. We stayed at like a hacienda hotel. That was interesting. Then we went to Guanajuato and we stayed in an old fortress castle hotel, which was very interesting as well. And we went to the different museums. We went to different places to go shopping. I think we went to León. If you don't know, León is a famous city in Mexico for shoes. So I remember I went to León and I bought a pair of shoes, which I loved. They're one of my favorite pairs of shoes that I ever bought. So yeah, it was just a fantastic first trip. But I wasn't by myself. I had Mexicans to guide me in a way. It was like a private tour. So while it was my first trip to Mexico, I wouldn't say it was my first trip to Mexico because I didn't speak Spanish and I wasn't by myself. I wasn't really surviving by myself. So what was my first trip surviving in Mexico by myself? I could talk about all the details, but I'm gonna just talk about the first part of my trip. I break up with my girlfriend a few years after my first trip to Mexico. I think it was like 2022 or something like that we break up. And after that, I made a decision to learn Spanish. And I do it. I learn Spanish. At the same time, I'm working a lot apart from finishing my university studies and getting my degree. So by the time it's 2025, I have a whole bunch of money saved up in my bank account. And I graduate from university, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided I'm gonna go to Latin America. I want to test out my Spanish in an authentic way, so why not go to Mexico? Now at the time, the main reason I had gotten more or less good at Spanish was because I was speaking to lots of Colombians and Venezuelans on language exchanges, on applications or online. So in a way, I wanted to go to Mexico, but in my heart and my soul, I really wanted to go to Colombia because the Colombians at that time were treating me really well. And they had gotten me really excited to get to know their country. But my roommate, before that second trip to Mexico, was from Guadalajara. And I had been his roommate for 2 years. He really supported me. He really helped me get through my breakup with my Mexican ex-girlfriend. And I'd also met another Mexican girl, and she had some connections to Mexicans in Mexico. So because of those two, I had these connections to Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. Now, if you don't know, Puerto Vallarta, Guadalajara, they're in the same state in Mexico. They're in the state of Jalisco. So for me, it just made sense. I have these connections. My advice to you, if you're thinking about traveling, it's always better to travel to a place where you have connections. You know somebody, or you know somebody that knows somebody that lives there, because it's just easier to settle in. So I was lucky because this Mexican girl who lived in Vancouver at that time, she had an architect friend who was building a boutique hotel in Puerto Vallarta. So I contacted him. She told me that if I wanted to, I wouldn't have to pay any money, just contact her friend. Her friend would pick me up from the airport, and he would allow me to basically live in this boutique hotel that was being built in Puerto Vallarta. So of course, I took advantage of the opportunity, and I thought, I'm going to go to Puerto Vallarta. I'm going to have fun. Of course, Puerto Vallarta is a beach city, very famous for vacations in Mexico. So I just imagined living by the beach, drinking beer, cocktails every day, dancing with Mexican girls. It'd be the best time of my life. That's what I was hoping for. So I arrive, the architect friend picks me up. I speak to him in Spanish. My Spanish was good enough to start having conversations, so I was very happy about that. He takes me to the boutique hotel. Yeah, it's still getting built. There are a few rooms which are finished. He shows me my room, which is on the second floor or third floor. And basically all it is just a bed. Just a bed, just a mattress. Not even a bed, it's a mattress on the ground to sleep on. And the bathroom works, but yeah, there's no tables. There's not really any other furniture. I don't think there was a TV in the room at all. It was just the mattress on the floor and a bathroom to use, which at that time I was, I think, 25 years old or 24 years old. I really didn't need that much. I wasn't working online at that time, so I really didn't need internet. All I really needed was basically data on a phone to stay in touch with my family on social media. I didn't need that much. But to tell you the truth, I only stayed in Puerto Vallarta for 1 week. Why? I just got really bored. I'm Canadian. My heritage, my culture has trained me to always be working. In a way, I don't really like it. It would be nice to relax. I know many Latinos will always tell me to relax, take it easy, or for example, it's Sunday. Sunday's the day to relax, and just for my family, we don't relax on the weekends. We're not really working, but for example, my father, he'll be working on projects at home. My mother, she'll be working on some job that she has to do for a client on Sundays or Saturdays. Yeah, we will relax a little bit. We'll have supper all together as a family, or we'll have a barbecue, but we're not going to spend the whole day in bed or the whole day watching Netflix. For us, it just doesn't really make sense. So I was at the beach, and I really didn't like the beach culture. I just couldn't convince myself to relax, drink beers, and do nothing for a month, a few months, for a year. I couldn't do it. So even though I was in a perfect situation, I wasn't paying rent. Oh, I remember there was a kitchen on the roof of the boutique hotel. So I had free room, I had a free kitchen to use. I was in a perfect situation in one of the most popular beach destinations in the Americas, but I wasn't happy. To be honest, if I could go back, I probably would have stayed longer. I probably would have calmed myself down a little bit to really take advantage of the situation. But no, I at that time, I really wanted to work. So during that first week, I went to the beach. I learned how to get around a Mexican city. I learned how to buy things at a grocery store, buy things at a market. One of my best memories from my first time in Puerto Vallarta was going to one of those typical Latin American open air markets and ordering enchiladas. Now, if you don't know and you're Latino, they always advise us to be careful with buying or consuming street food in Latin America, because they say people don't wash their hands, you're gonna get sick, you're gonna get food poisoning. So I was really worried that I was gonna get food poisoning from enchiladas that I had ordered at this open air market. So I remember I took a big walk along the boardwalk in Puerto Vallarta, and then I made a loop and I arrived at the open air market. And I passed one food stall in the open air market, which is selling typical Mexican lunches. They had enchiladas. And at that point, I already loved enchiladas. So I wanted to try, first, to use my Spanish to order Mexican food for the first time from a food stall. And of course, I wanted to try authentic Mexican enchiladas in Puerto Vallarta, in this open air market. So yeah, we go. No, not we go. I was by myself, so I go to this open air market. I use my Spanish. I order some enchiladas. Can't remember if it was green sauce or red sauce, but I ordered enchiladas. And enchiladas, if you don't know, usually have lettuce, onions, and cream on top. And they usually say the lettuce, if it's not washed properly or they use just regular water to wash the lettuce, it can make you sick. So the enchiladas were delicious. I ate them, but I was really worried that I was gonna get sick from this, from the lettuce on top of the enchiladas. So as soon as I finished my enchiladas, I paid and I quickly walked. I didn't run, but I walked really quickly back to my apartment because I was certain that within a few hours I was going to be either vomiting or having diarrhea, and I wanted to be in my room when that happened. I didn't want to be at the beach and not knowing where to puke or where to evacuate my bowels from the diarrhea that I had. So I walked very quickly back to my apartment and I laid down on my bed and I waited for a few hours, just seeing if I was gonna have food poisoning. Luckily, I didn't get any food poisoning. Actually, it's kind of funny because my first trip to Mexico City in 2021 and my second trip to Mexico in 2025, I never got food poisoning. I never got sick from the food, which I was very happy about it. It wasn't until 2020 when I returned to Mexico for a third time that I got sick from the food. Actually, I think I have a few videos. You can watch the videos about my getting sick experiences in Mexico. Yeah, right here. But yeah, I didn't stay long in Puerto Vallarta. I really wanted to start working. I really wanted to be doing something productive. I didn't want to be at the beach drinking beers, micheladas, mojitos for months on end. It was really boring to me. So I packed my bags. I told the architect, my connection in Puerto Vallarta, hey, thank you for everything, but I'm going to Guadalajara. And I took a bus from Puerto Vallarta to Guadalajara. And it was in Guadalajara where I more or less started my English teaching career. I stayed for 3 months in Guadalajara, really getting better at Spanish, learning how to teach English. I was teaching English illegally under the table. I wasn't making that much, but I was making some money. I was being productive. I was learning how to teach. So it was a good experience. And yeah, I liked my time in Guadalajara, but I only stayed for 3 months. The main reason I was there was because my roommate, he was from Guadalajara. So my first day when I arrived, the father of my ex-roommate, he picked me up from the bus terminal, and I think that night and the next day he basically gave me a tour of the city, his city, and I think I stayed at his place for, I can't remember how long. I think I stayed just for a few days, like 2 days or 3 days. I didn't really want to be staying with him because, like any Mexican family with a little bit of money, they lived in a residential conjunto residencial. I hate conjuntos residenciales. I understand why Latinos live in them because it's more safe, but they're incredibly boring. Nothing happens. You need to have a vehicle to get anywhere. I didn't want to be staying with them for a long time. So I think after a few days, I finally found a place to stay by, I think it's called Avenida Chapultepec in Guadalajara. And then I stayed in a hostel or something like that for 1 week, and then I finally found an apartment that I lived in for the next 2 months, I believe. And yeah, Guadalajara was fantastic. Definitely one of my favorite times in Latin America. I went to an authentic gym, Latino gym, one of those gyms that's been around since 1905. I remember the locker room was a whole bunch of naked Mexican men that were 80 years old, and they even had a little food stall where you can get green juice to drink after working out, and you would just shoot the shit with Herman. I believe his name was Herman. He was a good guy. I talked a lot of Spanish with him, talking about Canada, talking about Mexican culture, so that was awesome. I met some other Canadians and Americans in Guadalajara. We went out a few times trying to talk to girls. I met, of course, a few girls in Guadalajara. They showed me their city, the different parks, the different bars. And yeah, it was just a fantastic experience. I loved it, but I didn't stay. My plan was already to basically take a bus. I think I took a bus. I can't remember, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I took a bus from Guadalajara to Mexico City. Then from Mexico City, I traveled through southern Mexico to Guatemala in order to see the Aztec and Mayan pyramids. And that's a story for another video, but that more or less was my second trip in Mexico, but the first trip where I had to really use my Spanish in order to survive, to buy food, to rent my own apartment, to get a membership at a gym, to make friends, to meet girls. For that reason, it was a fantastic experience because I realized that I could speak Spanish, I could use my Spanish to live in Latin America, and I was very proud of myself that that happened. So of course, if you're somebody learning English, keep on learning English. You're gonna realize that you have good enough English in order to survive in places where you need English to live, or to work at a company where you need English to make money, to get a job. Believe in yourself. You're gonna do it. So anyways, those were my two first trips to Mexico. Do you have any questions about the trip? Leave me your questions down below in the comments. If you like these simple English videos where I just talk about my experiences, then make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell icon if you want to receive notifications when I release new videos. And that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon, my dear student.